Hats off to you, Canon. It's been heavily rumoured for a while now that Canon have been working on a behemoth of a new mirrorless camera speculated to be the R5. Well, this morning Canon confirmed a development of an R5 mirrorless body. But they haven't actually confirmed all of the specifications, so admittedly this might have been a bit of premature calculation. Now we'll get onto the R5 in a moment, but alongside this announcement there was also announcements regarding some RF lenses as well. The first is that there are several new RF lenses that are going to be announced throughout 2020, which is only a good thing really, because the RF lens lineup certainly needs some serious expansion. The second was the release of a brand new 24-105 kit lens. Now this is a very budget friendly kit lens, coming in at only about £450 UK, which is probably more designed to go alongside the RP rather than the R or the R5. But considering that the current 24-105 kit lens alone is about almost £1,200, this is certainly a substantially cheaper option. But there are some downfalls to that. The biggest for me is the aperture range being only f4 to 7.1. Which for me, 7.1 is just a little bit too insane. I mean, wasn't that long ago that pretty much all lenses only went down to f5.6, and then some third-party manufacturers started edging that down to 6.3. Now 7.1, we're only a third of a stop away from being at f8. Arguably a potential better choice if you want a budget kit lens for the RP would actually be adapting the 24-105 STM from a DSLR, because that's not only £100 cheaper than the RF lens, but also has a faster aperture of f5.6 on the long end. So that might be a slightly better budget kit lens. But either way, it's still good to see Canon expanding the budget lens lineup of the RF as well, because most of the RF lenses at the moment are more expensive high-end lenses, which seem a bit pointless when you're trying to then push budget bodies like the RP. The other lens announcement that came along was a development announcement of a 100-500mm RF lens and a 1.4 and a 2x Tele Converter. And again, the telephoto lens is good to see, because at the moment the only telephoto lens native to RF is the 70-200 2.8. Anything longer than that, you're going to have to adapt off a DSLR lens. But rather than just make a mirrorless version of a 100-400 lens like Sony did with the G Master, Canon have gone a little bit different and made it slightly longer on the long end, up to 500mm, which is good for trying to shoot far away subjects. The negative to that is that rather than make the lens bigger to incorporate the 100mm, they've brought the aperture down from 4.5 to 5.6 like you generally find with the DSLR lens, to f4.5 down to 7.1 again. And it's the same story. 7.1 on the long end for me is just too slow, especially for what is supposed to be an L-grade telephoto lens. I appreciate Canon have been actively trying to push the low light capabilities of their autofocus systems, so 7.1 aperture probably wouldn't struggle that much, at least not as much as it would have done a few years ago when trying to shoot in low light. But still, 7.1 at a max aperture is going to be quite restrictive in terms of what ISO you can shoot at and how much separation you can get from your background. Especially given, like I said, not only is the DSLR lens up to 5.6, but Sony's 200-600 and a lot of third-party lenses that go up to 600mm are only at 6.3. So you've got another 100mm of focal length with a third of a stop less aperture. I think more people would have preferred to have seen a faster aperture, even if it came at the expense of a slightly larger lens. Or even, don't make it 500mm, stick to a 100-400 f4.5 to 5.6. You've just released a 1.4x Tele Converter as well, which when coupled with it would give you a 560mm f8. So the new lenses definitely help expand the lens lineup and start to fill in those gaps that are needed, but I think the 7.1 apertures for me are just a little bit too far, and I think Canon risk maybe becoming a little bit laxadays and making everything that little bit slower to try and keep the cost down. Now, on to the R5 announcement. So, like I said, this has been rumoured for a while, and the specs I was a little bit skeptical about. Now, not everything's been confirmed, but what I've seen so far does look pretty impressive. It just remains to be seen with the complete launch whether those specs are truly what the camera's capable of, or whether it's a little bit of a marketing spin. But what we definitely know so far is that the camera body is slightly larger than the EOS R. Not by much, but only slightly. The back of it has definitely been improved. That little annoying touch bar has gone in favour of a more traditional thumbstick. And the little dabber wheel that you find on Rebel cameras that's on the EOS R has gone in favour of a more conventional proper thumb wheel that you'd find on the likes of the 5D and 1D series. The camera has a new sensor of an unknown resolution, but it was rumoured to be about 45 megapixels, but it has been confirmed that Canon have finally got IBIS. In terms of shooting speed, it was rumoured to be doing 12 frames a second mechanical and up to 20 frames a second electronic, which was the bit I was really sceptical of if the resolution turned out to be 45 megapixels. Well, Canon have confirmed that it will be doing 12 mechanical, 20 electronic, but again, no confirmation on resolution. Even if it does turn out to be a 45 megapixel resolution camera, there's no guarantee that those high-end shooting speeds will come at full resolution. But if it can do that, that's pretty bloody impressive. Although my concern would be if it is doing 20 frames a second and 45 megapixels, is rolling shutter. Because at such a high resolution, rolling shutter is going to become extremely pronounced unless they have some sort of brand new stack sensor close to being a global shutter, in which case you're not going to be using 20 frames a second for anything fast moving, which means you're not going to be using it for sports and wildlife, which means you're then going to be restricted to the 12 frames a second mechanical, which kind of keeps it away from the 1DX Mark III. The bigger conundrum with the 20 frames a second and 45 megapixels is going to be the buffer depth. How long can you shoot for before the camera is going to run out of space? Because 45 megapixel files are going to be huge. Now, Canon have already shown with the 1DX Mark III that you can shoot at 20 frames a second for very long periods of time, but that's only if you've got a fast enough memory card for the buffer to be able to empty itself. Otherwise, it might end up looking like some cameras we've seen in the past where they say it can shoot bursts of up to 30 frames a second, but you find out that it can only actually shoot that for 12 pictures, so you're not even getting a half a second burst. And speaking of rolling shutter, the video specs. Now, it was rumoured that this was going to be shooting 8K video. Again, quite skeptical given Canon's recent history of not being particularly bothered about video specs. Well, they've confirmed it will do 8K video, but they haven't said any more than that. So we don't know whether that means 8K time-lapse recording, or whether that's going to have a crop, or whether it's going to be missing features like autofocus or sound recording, or whether you can only do it at ISO 100 on a Tuesday. All of that remains to be seen. But if we go on the pretense that it can do full sensor 8K at 30 frames a second, that's pretty insane. If anything, the confirmation of 8K does at least confirm that it's going to be a pretty high resolution camera, since 8K equates to about 33 megapixels. So that means at worst the sensor is 33 megapixels. The question then becomes, if it's a 45 megapixel sensor, how are they getting that 8K footage? Are they doing a full sensor readout and downsampling? I highly doubt it. Are they going to be doing a full sensor readout and then pixel binning down to 8K? That's probably what most people would like to see. However, unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think what we're probably going to see is them do a 1-to-1 pixel readout of the center 33 megapixels and it have an additional crop factor. I'm basing that off the fact that I think it was Canon Australia mentioned in their press release about being able to pull still images from the 8K video. which is what they kept advertising with the 1DX Mark II and the 5D Mark IV with the MJPEG shooting. So I'd suspect that we're probably going to end up back at that with some really ridiculously high bitrate in practical codec with a 1:1 pixel readout just to be able to get the 8K video. Although in fairness, even if it wasn't MJPEG and it was MPEG-4, most people probably aren't going to shoot 8K anyway. It's the 4K that more people will be interested in. And finally, a mention of the card slots. So it's been confirmed dual card slots, which again is something that a lot of people have been asking for forever and a day, and it's confirmed they are finally getting dual card slots, but there's no mention of what those formats are going to be. Now, Gordon Lang speculated that he thinks it's going to be dual SD card slots. Personally, I'm not actually convinced. But going off that back corner shot of the camera where you can see the card slot door, that looks more like the card slot doors off something like the 7D Mark II or the 5D Mark IV. It's a pretty sizable door. So yes, you could easily fit 2 SD card slots behind there, but given the really high resolution and fast shooting speed and 8K footage, I don't think even a UHS 2 card slot is going to be fast enough. I suspect what we're going to see is one CF Express card and one SD card, more like what you find in the 5D and 7D cameras, where everything fast has to be done through the CF Express and the SD card is more for a backup. So far what we definitely know about the R5 has been confirmed as being correct from the rumours. It just remains to be seen whether the rest of the rumours turn out to be true. If they do, it's going to be a fantastic camera. Realistically, I suspect that some of those are probably exaggerated specs a little bit, and maybe in real world the camera can't perform quite that well, but I think as long as it performs 80% of what is rumoured, it's still going to be a phenomenal camera. And a great step for anyone, even if you're not a Canon shooter, because it'll still encourage other manufacturers to push themselves that little bit further on their next generation of cameras. But what do you make of all these announcements? Leave your thoughts and comments in the box down below. While you're down there, if you haven't already, please consider hitting the subscribe button, and there is also a link to my Patreon account and merch store down there as well. Thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.